Okay, so moderators, this is what separates your comments and your final thoughts on this and any action items is what separates us from going home. So be quick and be specific. And we'd like to, as Angela mentioned, we'd like to have everyone's input on this. We would, as we start this, I was reminded of a quote I learned a long time ago, and I had to look it up. You can Google anything nowadays, and so in a minute. And Lincoln said something many years ago, which was the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. So what we do in the school system and what we do with these programs will definitely make a difference in our next generation of Portuguese Americans. Second, I believe that as Representative Cabral said, you need to basically, and Jamie also, you need to basically get involved. And that's one of the reasons why we certainly need more Portuguese Americans in school boards, more Portuguese Americans in city councils, more Portuguese Americans in state governments, because that is where things begin to happen. And why do we have a Portuguese immersion program, as Jamie mentioned, in Hillmar, California, a city that has 5,000 people. And so why do we have it? Because the superintendent's Portuguese. 3 of the 5 board members are Portuguese Americans. So there's enough power there to make things happen, and we need to be present. So we'll start with Dulce. So final thoughts, notes from your panel, and any action items that will be suggested.
One of the questions that our panelists reflected on is on how to get more people elected or appointed into office. And right after our Honorable Chief Justice presentation, the attorneys present decided that they are going to form an organization, a Portuguese-American Bar Association. And perhaps this should be followed by such organizations at the state level. So that's a great accomplishment, and they were on table 29, right? Leaving their cards and personal information. In terms of getting elected into office, what do candidates need? And from my research and also from what was said here today, you need an organization. But of course, this depends on what type of electoral system exists in the jurisdiction where you are running. Is it a blue state, a red state, a purple state? Is it partisan or non-partisan elections? If it is partisan elections, you have the party as a political organization already established that can provide you with support. But if you are running in non-partisan elections, which most of the municipal elections in the United States are non-partisan, then you need to create your own organization. And most candidates that I have, and officials that I have spoken to, the first thing they say is, I start with family. And our panelists said that as well. Family and friends. And you start building your own organization. You can't run a campaign by yourself. You need to have an organization to help you, to fundraise for you, to promote you. And then you also need then to reach out to the community organizations, and that was mentioned here as well. And it was also mentioned that those organizations really need to come together and collaborate and get behind our candidates, people that declare that they are running for office. So in addition to that, you need money. How do you spell power? M-O-N-E-Y. And so there's got to be a way to raise the resources, and you're going to raise resources from family, from friends, from the wealthy people in your community. You have to go shake a lot of hands and kiss a lot of babies, and hopefully people give you money. But As a community, we could also do better and find ways of channeling money to our candidates. I'm sorry to say, but you need money to win elections in this country. And New York has started a PAC, which I think it's a great idea. New York is on the cutting edge of mobilizing the Portuguese-American community there. And so creating additional PACs. And once you create a PAC, then you need to define what it is that the candidates that you are going to support should stand for. And then that was what our second question was about. What is the Portuguese-American political agenda? And of course, we talked about Lajes and the role of the Atlantic and Portugal's strategic place in the Atlantic and the importance to the United States. We also have been talking about the promotion of the Portuguese language in the United States. But the survey that we did shows some issues. We have an aging population. And so any policy that is directed at the welfare and well-being of the of the elderly population is a Portuguese-American issue. So other issues like water in California, that's not a Portuguese-American issue, but it is a Portuguese-American issue when we have such a large population of farmers in California. So what else is out there that we can identify as issues, and they're going to vary from state to state and from political jurisdiction to political jurisdiction, that then we can advocate along the political sphere for the Portuguese-American. These are American issues that are important to the Portuguese-American community. Another issue that comes to mind that has been in the news recently is the minority status of Portuguese-American businesses. Is that something that we should be advocating for? Because in some places we are no longer considered a minority or to have a minority status. Is that important for Portuguese businesses to continue to have minority status and benefit from the set-asides that exist for minority businesses? And there are other issues, so an agenda item, an action item is to identify the issues. In terms of the future and the movement of the Portuguese-American population from area to area, I think an agenda item would also be to find out who is in Colorado? Do they have an established Portuguese-American community there? Do they have churches? Do they have clubs? We know that to run for office, you gotta go to the churches, you gotta go to the clubs, you gotta reach out to these organizations where you can get votes. I mean, churches generally don't support a political candidate, but your voters are there. So do we have established social capital in these new areas where Portuguese Americans are settling that we can mobilize in order to, it doesn't have to be a Portuguese American person running. It can be Anglo-American candidate, but that candidate to get our vote then needs to support X, Y, Z. Basically those are the main things that, another issue in relation to how to get people elected that came across is mentoring and internships. And as we look forward to the next generations, the people that are in power today, that are in office today, need to bring someone along. They need to mentor someone. And I was talking with the Chief Justice, and he mentioned Milton Silva, right? Silva, who asked him to come along and become a judge when he retired. We need to have the people that are in office currently do that. They mentor a young person that then is going to replace them. And in my interviews with Rhode Island politicians, they all mentioned someone that was a mentor to them, that so this person got me into politics. So we need to make an effort in that direction. And I say, well, I'll stop here.
Okay, we'll move on to the next panel, Director, and then at the end, if there are any other issues that we would like to bring up as a collective. Anyway, one quick note, as Dulce mentioned, indeed money talks, as we all know, and I think that our community needs to get a little bit more involved in political process through the money process, and slowly we're learning that, especially, I can tell you that in California, as you all know, we have the 3 Portuguese Americans in one area that represents, in Congress. It's kind of a unique situation, and more, they'll tell you that the votes they get, the Portuguese American votes, are not putting them in Congress because there's not enough people of Portuguese American ancestry in their respective districts to put them in Congress. But they'll tell you that their money is. And Professor Vasco Rato knows this gentleman that I'm going to speak about real quick for about 2 seconds. His name is 2 famous brothers, immigrants from the islands of the Azores, who have a very deep voice and a very Portuguese terceira accent. And they just not too long ago, there were an event where it was a fundraiser for one of the political figures from California. And I was kind of surprised to see him there. And I said, so you're contributing? And he said, well, for the last 25 years, I've been giving cows to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the festa that we have there. Every Portuguese community in California has a Holy Spirit festa. Same thing in the East Coast, obviously. And every year we give about 15 to 20 cows. That's a lot of cows. And I said, my God, yes, it is a lot of cows. He said, well, I figured I'm still going to give 12, but 3 of them are going to go to the politicians, because I get a lot of things from the politicians. I haven't seen much from the Holy Spirit. So not to question anybody's faith, but... so I think that the process is moving where people are believing or they are seeing some results in some of the funds that are being invested, let's put it that way, in the political world. So hopefully that will replicate throughout the community in both coasts and all over the Portuguese Americans.
To say something?
Please. You have a cow to give?
Well, you mentioned this. No, you mentioned this, and it's we are a small group, and it behooves us to make alliances with other ethnic groups in the United States, and that should be another agenda item, which is to identify which groups we can make alliances with so that together we can have more influence and more access. That's a very good point. We talked about that in different aspects in Silvia's group as well. And just as a side note, Congressman David Valdão, who many of you have heard, who is also from the same area, got elected his first time, he's the 3rd time congressman. He did a debate on Univision, the Spanish station that's nationwide, but for the Central Valley, is in Spanish, because his opponent spoke Spanish, and David learned Spanish on the streets, with his, through his work, at the dairy, and it was kind of a street Spanish. But he did a complete debate in Spanish. So you have to build alliances with who you have to build alliances in order to get elected into the office that you're looking forward to. Silvia.
Yes, thank you. If you allow me, I'll take more of the approach of notes rather than a narrative. And I will start with the first note that I thought all panelists in the Building the Social Capital mentioned, which was show and tell. We need to show more of who we are and what we do. We need to tell more who we are and what we do. The number 2 point had to do with intergenerational relationship, how different generations can converge in the same organization. And there was a sense that change can have, or turning down ideas can actually turn people out of the organization, and so instead have a different approach to new ideas, or at least asking the elders of the organizations to have a different approach to new ideas, but also on the young folks, on the youth, to also take that in mind as they are presenting new ideas to the organizations. Be patient. So the patience was not a word presented, but that's what I read. Bring ideas, new ideas in slowly, and implement them slowly as well. Number 3, on my notes, very interesting point, ask your members. Let's ask our members, what do we think about the paths of our organizations, and where do we want to go? We saw that with Anthony Pio, who said, after participating in this event, this is what I am going to do in my own organization, the Luso-American Financial. I'm going to do a survey. I'm going to ask our members, what is it that we want to do in the future, thinking about the future. As number 4, I think we saw an interesting display of ethnic boundaries, even among our different civic organizations, or the speakers in the 2 first panels had at least felt the need to identify their regional boundary up front. That was interesting as well, to see that replicated here. Number 4 on my list, there was an interesting question by Diniz Borges about professionalization, and then also an interesting response on what does it mean for a volunteer organization to professionalize. Does that even make sense? Is that possible? What makes sense? What does not make sense? So an interesting question for each organization. The last point that Dulce and Diniz were just discussing has to do with building alliances. That was also building alliances with other ethnic organizations. That was also a point in our panel. In order to build coalitions. So the sense that, or the idea that our individual organizations need to continue to build coalition, whether it be regional coalition, national coalition, across ethnicities, coalition needs to happen. And I will finally, the mentoring also, of course, we saw the example of PAPS that places a very strong emphasis on mentoring, but the other organizations mentioned that as well. And finally, I will end with the last thought that I have in my notes, which has to do with volunteerism and volunteer organizations, the fact that we will not do what we do not value and what we do not support. So volunteer organizations follow the desires, the needs of their membership, and will continue to do so.
Thank you. And I will turn to the last panel. Silvia mentioned the thing about regional boundaries. There is, of course, we do this with some, joking and a little bit of anecdotal, San Miguel, Terceira, but there are some things that are pretty serious, between San Miguel and Terceira, because as you all recall, a few years ago, there was a summit in Lajes that then there was the invasion of Iraq. It was the famous meeting between President Bush and José Manuel Durão Barroso, help me with names, Aznar, and Tony Blair. And of course, there was, after that, the conflict began, and good Terceirense there was actually some talk, even in the Portuguese press and regional press, there was some talk about some retaliation to, from Saddam Hussein at the time. And there was a good person from the island of Terceira who decided to send a map to Saddam Hussein because, who knows where the Azores are than the Azorians. And that's quite true, because here about 2 months ago, I was going through the Lisbon airport on my, 6 months ago, on my way to the Azores, and I had crossed over a couple of times, and I had to go back and get something that I'd forgotten from a friend, and I told the young lady, said, I was just here, and I had to go through security again. I said, I was just here. Of course, she sees, gazillion people. And she said, well, where are you going anyway? And I said, to Graciosa. Where's that at? So, literally, sometimes most people don't know where the Azores are, literally. And so this person, in order to inform Saddam Hussein where the Azores, where this historic summit happened, sent him a map of the Azores with all the 9 islands and put a little X over Ponta Delgada and said, here is where they signed the treaty. Any retaliation must be done here in Ponta Delgada. So there are some limits to that congeniality. Onésimo.
I'll be short, but Judge Milton Silva was mentioned here from Fall River. I was at a restaurant with family a week ago, and he was celebrating his 95th birthday. He's very frail, but he was still there. But he's a very liberal judge from Massachusetts. His name is Milton Silva. He's known as Not Guilty Milty. Not Guilty Milty. Okay, very briefly, there are two major areas that college and elementary school. The summary of what was said can be put in 2 sentences. João Caixinha said it. There's a need for a recruitment of more adjunct coordinators for the states where there are Portuguese schools. I would recommend that they clone João Caixinha because, as we know, he has been doing a great job. But the model that he has established is excellent, and it should be replicated. So, so there's, back to money, there's got to be a more realistic budget. You cannot do much at all with a budget of $40,000. The other thing is there's a need for more memoranda, but nowadays it's just memorandums of understanding with other states following the Massachusetts model, Utah, etc. The model has been working and should be expanded. I tend to think small and act big, because if you come up with big ideas and then we cannot implement them. I suggest that from what I gathered here, that PALCUS does not have, we're all volunteers, PALCUS does not have people to carry out these things, but also APSA, American Portuguese Studies Association, doesn't have either, but together with them they could create a subcommittee. Someone said that if there should be a 11th commandment, which is thou shalt not committee, but a committee that could look at the situation of Portuguese studies in the US at the college level and identify the spots, the areas that have potential for growth, and then use this information and suggest it to the foundations. I insist on the fact that Portugal's money should be used only as seed money. The rest should be done here, and this is when you mobilize the political forces, the community, etc. Just use it as seed money. This is what we did at Brown. Brown pays it all. It's a large budget, but that's how it should be done. But it should be negotiated. It should not be hand-given just, okay, you should just not give it. You should plan this, strategize everything. So I suggest that PALCUS gets together with APSA. The president of APSA is now moved to Brandon. It's going to be very easy to arrange for this, and get a subcommittee to identify what are and work only on those few. I mean, we cannot do everything at the same time. Just identify, there are places like UMass Amherst, 2 professors have retired, 3 professors in Portuguese, the 3rd one is retiring. We don't know what's going to happen there. So, and then what should be done? Nobody knows about this. What should be done? So think small, act big, and PALCUS could get together with APSA and identify those. And the very last point it would be think of creating programs, exchange programs, or to take kids to Portugal. And the idea is, I just leave the idea open. It's up to you. There's so many ways of doing it. And it's not difficult. There are great things that we done with Providence Charter School. They were brought to the Azores. They came back. Kids who don't speak Portuguese, they learn Portuguese in Providence. They came back completely fascinated with the Azores. They are going, now it's an yearly thing. And these are kids who are not Portuguese. I'll leave you with this idea, because this is where the seed can produce the best results.
Thank you. Any other action items that people in the audience, we'll start with Marie.
Microphone. I have 2 microphones.
Can we silence the yellow?
I'm going to take advantage of holding the microphone to first of all commend our moderators on doing a splendid job of distilling all the information that was offered.
Marie, all we did was just follow the strict orders you gave. I should see the long list of do's and don'ts, and we just obeyed.
And you did.
But I'm used to I have lots of years of training.
You did a wonderful job.
I obey.
But I do want to thank you because you have distilled the information and synthesized it beautifully. And I really want to thank you because I want to tell everybody they just didn't show up. They have been working on this for months. So to make this come off so seamlessly and to make it productive. So I want to thank you. And while I'm holding the microphone, I have an observation and I have a recommendation. And the first one, the observation would be that in my training in nonprofit studies, it's very often said that one should not silo one's issues. And so today we've talked about education, elected officials, and we've talked about social capital in organizations. And so to give some thought as we put together this action plan and how those things can be integrated so that they're not necessarily siloed, that they're not necessarily separate things, but ways that they can interact with each other. Because I think that when you raise, for example, Portuguese language education, you're raising other things as well, and vice versa. That's my observation. My recommendation is, and I know we've joked a lot about regionalism, so, you know, whether you are from the continent or the Azores or São Miguel or Ribeira das Tainhas or wherever, I think at the end of the day, we have to come together as Portuguese. And the recommendation I am making is that if the organizations would embrace a project that PALCUS is launching for the 2020 census. I've just had a very long conversation with Ron Brown, who is the partnership specialist for this area, and we are talking about creating the first National Complete Count Committee for the U.S. Census. He has a step-by-step program for us, and I'm hoping that this is a way that we can galvanize our community and all come together as Portuguese.
Okay, there's some other ones. Right here, please. Marie, right here first, and then we'll go there.
And then there's a...
Okay, okay, we'll do João first then. Okay.
Good afternoon, boa tarde. I am a native of Portugal. It's up to you to find out what part of Portugal I'm originally from. I am a Portuguese advisor to the Portuguese government. I have been here all day, and I have to thank you, the panelists, the speakers, the main speakers, and PALCUS for this outstanding conference. We all going to leave here with a lot more knowledge, obviously, than when we came in. But I think we're missing something. We talk about involvement from the politicians, from the community. We should have more school committees, more senators, more House of Representatives, more congressmen from the Portuguese community. This is great, but we're missing one step. We should be naturalized. Without becoming U.S. citizens, we cannot vote. We cannot have any Portuguese Americans elected from our community. So I think the community should be involved in motivating the Portuguese Americans to become U.S. citizens so they can vote. Viva Portugal, God bless America.
Right here, please.
Joe Santos from Suffield, Connecticut. When we started the conference this morning, one of the questions that was posed rhetorically was, what is the future of the Portuguese community in the United States? And what is the future of the influence of the Portuguese community in the United States? And one of the things that I think we need to face is that this room and many people outside of this room are a product of the great wave of immigration that occurred from 1960 to the early 80s. And it's now 30 to 50 years later, and there's a significant professional, academic, and financial success of the community that is manifesting itself. But over time, we are going to, and our children are going to assimilate into the dominant communities. And so the question becomes, what do we do about that to maintain the authenticity of the Portuguese culture in America? So I'd like to pick up on Professor Almeida's earlier comment about, you take a young Portuguese person to Portugal for a week or two and they'll remember it forever. But I think it has to be done a little bit structuredly. Because, if the parent or the grandparent takes the young child to Portugal and they stay in the aldeia for the week, they might not want to go back. And so I also want to pick up on the gentleman from New Jersey's earlier comment about birthright Israel. So Israel sponsors, the government of Israel pays 25% of the cost of any Jewish American child, any Jewish American young person between the ages of 18 and 32, and they take them to Israel for 10 days. And it's a structured trip. And if we were to do something like that for Portuguese young people, where they don't just go to the aldeia, and they don't just go to a day at the beach, but they go to a theater, they go to see what the Fernando Pessoa statue is about in the Chiado of Lisboa. They go to see a nanotechnology laboratory at the University of Braga, because there is one, and other important and meaningful cultural experiences. That young person will be Portuguese for the rest of their lives. And so I'd like to really put that on the agenda if we could.
Back there, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bruno Machado. I'm also an advisor for the Portuguese government. And with all due respect with everybody in here, but I want to speak in our language that we've been defending all day in here, em português. E falou-se aqui promover candidatos, promover. Então temos que começar desde o princípio, desde o nosso país também. Porque há uma grande abstenção. Nós, os portugueses, deixamos as coisas acontecer. E nós temos que ser mais ativos, tirar a cabeça da areia e começarmos a trabalhar todos em conjunto para podermos então entrar e fazer coisas melhores. Porque nós temos essa capacidade, já o provamos várias vezes. Fizemos um excelente trabalho quando foi a Expo, fizemos um excelente trabalho quando foi o Euro. Todos juntos nós conseguimos trabalhar e conseguimos produzir muitas coisas. Então, aqui neste país, temos que começar a fazer o mesmo. Temos de deixar de ser críticos nós próprios e avançarmos e apoiarmos todos os nossos candidatos para podermos, então, no lugar de termos 3, termos 20 federais. No lugar de termos um no Estado, temos mais senadores no Estado, mais assemblymen. Vamos trabalhar todos juntos. E temos que começar com isso desde a educação, não só dos nossos filhos agora, educá-los a terem orgulho das nossas raízes, daquilo que nós somos, porque nós temos muita história por trás de nós, mesmo muito, fomos já donos do meio mundo, nós temos que ser orgulhosos pelo nosso país, pelo nosso passado e olharmos para o futuro horizonte que nos vem à frente, porque nós temos capacidade de o fazer. É só isso que eu queria dizer.
First of all, I wanted to thank everyone again. It's been an amazing weekend, most inspirational weekend I've had in a long time. And I wanted to say a very specific idea to get more Portuguese people elected to public office. I think that we need, similarly to what PALCUS has in terms of business directory for Portuguese Americans, I think we need a candidate directory for Portuguese Americans. Everybody is an incumbent, a challenger, somebody running. It doesn't matter. Put them on that list, put their contact info, put their website, put a donation link. Promote these candidates and start hosting seminars. These can be webinars hosted by our incumbent Portuguese legislators to teach folks how to get up and run for office. How do you fundraise? How do you file an FEC report? How do you get your commercials out there, yard signs, everything? We need our mentors in the community to lead the way, and we also need to be able to channel our financial resources into our candidates. So I want to be able to pull up on the internet a list of every Portuguese American in this entire country running and scroll down that list and donate to every single one I see that I think has a good chance of winning. I think that's a specific, concrete, actionable item, and I like to see it done.
I have a question. Are you running?
Could I borrow your pen just very quickly? I forgot to bring my pen. I'm going to put
Right back there.
What happened to
I
Lisa?
think Annabella has the mic.
candidate directory.
I think we have about another
You're
8 minutes or
closer.
so.
My name is Hello? Can you hear me? My name is Angelina Phelan. Hello? Can you hear me? No? My name is Angelina Phelan. I am originally from the Azores, from the island of Santa Maria. I have lived in Florida for over 20 years in a small, very small and dispersed community in the West Coast, namely St. Petersburg. And what I would like to see going forward, I really appreciate all the challenges, all the work, all the accomplishments that everybody here has been associated with. But we are faced in St. Petersburg, and I'm sure many other communities in Florida and throughout the United States, the small ones and dispersed ones where you have to travel a long way to a Portuguese club. In the one that I lived in, and many also do the same, the communities are aging, and so now we have second, third, and fourth generation where English is the only language spoken at home. But there is a desire to teach the little ones, because it's at the age of under 2 that you start learning a second language well. The desire to teach them, but they don't have the tools. So is there a way, any thoughts in that area, in the remote areas, not in the New England and California areas where the concentration is very high? Is there any ideas on how to reach out and help the people who want to teach their children or their grandchildren, is my case, the language?
Camões has an excellent online program that I'm sure João Caixinha and everyone else can put forth. There's an excellent online program by Camões and some of the publishing houses in Portugal as well. Porto Editora has a good program. So there are a few things we just need to, I think, and maybe PALCUS can facilitate that, putting that information out to parents. There are programs out there. Sometimes we just do, as was mentioned here, we don't do a very good job in promoting it. When I went to college many moons ago, my first professor in history was a Jewish American, and he turned to me and he said, "Borges, is that Portuguese?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he says, "You guys did a wonderful job. You discovered the world, but you failed to tell anybody about it." And so sometimes we have that. We have these resources, and Camões has the resources. There are publishing houses in Portugal have resources. We just need to get them out to everyone.
Can you pass this to him, please?
Thank you. It's on. Dan Davidson, American Councils. Since everyone is in Washington, it's fun to be able to let you know, if you haven't heard already, that this past week the State Department has designated Portuguese as a critical language. That for government, that's actually important. one of 15. Now, while it is still classified as an LCTL, as a less commonly taught, it in fact is a critical language now. It's been designated that way by the Department of Defense for a number of years, but the State Department designation is actually the one that carries in government. So that what that means, and from a practical point of view, is the future availability of scholarship funds for our students, particularly at the undergraduate level, graduate level, hopefully soon also at the high school level, to study at U.S. government expense in some part of the Lusophone world. Some of the preference recently has been in sub-Saharan Africa, but in fact it can be in many parts of the world, so that's good. The reason I stood up, however, was to say that we've talked a lot about the seeding and development of new programs, and that's understandable, but keep in mind that the key for success is also retention of students, whether they're heritage or whether they're mainstream garden variety Americans who want to learn Portuguese for all sorts of good professional and personal reasons. And so to the extent that we heard today from Jamie in Utah, we saw a growth trajectory there of 0 to 250 in a matter of 5 years. That is a remarkable development, a remarkable pattern, which I think everyone in this community should pay careful attention to. That's a growth model that's clearly working. And the issue for Jamie's students is, okay, they come out of the 9th grade, then what, right? And I think we in the community need to think, what does that bridge look like going on to college? How can we make sure that they don't then drop the language at that point, just when they're getting to a point when they can begin to really use it in effective ways? So I think as parents, if you are indeed many of your parents of bilingual kids or prospective bilingual kids, there are a lot of things we can do, but one is to encourage them to stay with the study of the language. Start as soon as you can. Keep in mind, it's never really too late. You can also start as a young adult or as an adult and still make great progress. You may not sound quite as good when you speak, but you'll still be good and you can use it professionally. The government needs people who are functional, high-functioning bilinguals. And that means professional level fluency, right? Not just a smattering. And that is entirely possible within the U.S. educational system. It's not bad. And with these new government scholarships plugging in, we have the real prospect of seeing our own students, wherever they start, junior high, elementary, senior secondary, or college, coming out and entering the profession, or entering their professions as high-functioning bilinguals. We need some role models and some good examples of kids who have already done that and are now working in government business, not as monolinguals who could have been bilingual, but rather people who use their language every day. Thank you.
One last one.
All right, so my name is Natalia Luis, and I'm from Machtorranya, which is just outside of Pombal, which is just equidistant between Lisbon and Oporto, for those of you who wanted to know where I'm from. I wanted to start first by thanking Ambassador Fezes Vidal, and thank you to our Deputy Ambassador Federico. Thank you to Vasco Rato, and thank you so much to the extraordinary leadership of PALCUS for putting this thing together. You have navigated 27 years, and you've got us all in the room, and you've brought everybody together, and this is so incredibly impressive. We've had excellent speakers, we've had excellent panelists, and we've had excellent content. So now I ask you, and I bid you to challenge yourselves with what now? We're hungry and we're thirsty. We want to help. We want to be part of the equation. I've heard the volunteer conversation, and I understand it. But together, I think we're so united, and if we could only come together more often. So I'm wondering if all of the organizations who participated today would be willing to meet annually and maybe discuss the top subject matters that have been parlayed today and thought through today, so that we could make a more effective, more efficient, faster evolution of the conversation that we've had today, because it's been extraordinary. And thank you so much.
Again, we'd like to thank all three of the leaders of this fund, of all the three panelists. They did an outstanding job. I'm not going to say anything else. Marie's already told me to be quiet. So, but thanks to all three of them. And our final remarks will be from Angela Simões.